Okay. Good evening, everybody. This is John Damaris. For those of you that don't know me, I'm the Director of Operations at Civil Air Patrol, and I'll be presenting to you here this evening on missions and resources for our National Emergency Service Academy. So for the staff, just want to make sure everybody is seeing the briefing live. If you want to give me a thumbs up there, all good? Okay, great. Well, we got a lot to cover, so we'll go through this, and as you have questions, I know the team's going to be trying to field some of those as we go through, but I'll try to field questions at the end as well. So we'll press ahead here. So resource-wise, CAP is kind of blessed. We have a lot of resources that bring to bear on our missions. Obviously, we're known for our aviation assets. We're the largest owner of single-engine airplanes for Cessna aircraft in the world. We also have the largest glider fleet in the United States, and we have quickly grown to have a lot of small UAS as well. And actually, I didn't get a chance to update this number for the briefing here, but I was told right before the briefing here that we've actually have broken the 1,800 numbers for small UAS here as of today. And we're actually expected to have over 2,000 of them by the end of the fiscal year, so just a few months away. So lots of resources, and lots of people that support our missions, and a lot of other resources though too. A lot of vehicles across the country, and a huge communications system that supports us. CAPs that spread far and wide. We have got over 1,400 units across the country. We have our 8 regions, 52 wings. Then there's 125 groups, but then when you look at our squadrons, it's really spread out. Now, obviously, we've got some areas of the country that there's not as many units. If you're in the western half of the United States where the populations are not as dense, we don't have as many units, which makes some sense. But we've got a lot of potential for CAP to actually support across the country with local communities. And it's pretty much the same thing with our aircraft. They're spread out across the country as well. When you look at our distribution of airplanes, folks in many cases ask, well, where are they positioned? Well, generally it's where our populations and where our units are. Obviously, we don't have an airplane assigned to every unit. When you do the math, it ends up being about 1/3 of our units, and a lot of aircraft are shared amongst multiple squadrons. But generally, what we advertise to our customers is that our aircraft generally can be overhead within about 2 hours of mission approval, weather permitting, since we fly little airplanes. But big picture, they're spread out across the country, and it's a pretty amazing fleet when you look at it. 570 powered airplanes, 47 gliders, and 2 hot air balloons even. And the gliders and the hot air balloons obviously are primarily used for our youth flight training initiatives, but the powered aircraft that support multiple missions, obviously we do a lot of youth aviation with them as well, with cadet orientation flights and flight instruction, but we do a lot of our operational emergency services missions with them as well. And they're pretty amazing setups. We're a predominantly Cessna 182 fleet, and about more than 2/3 of them now actually are glass cockpit airplanes that have been purchased over the last 20 years or so. We also have a large number of 172s, 184 of them, and they're primarily used for a lot of our youth aviation initiatives. And then we've got some other smaller groups of airplanes. We've got a couple aircraft in their types of aircraft that are unique to Alaska. The Cessna 185s there that you see on floats up in Alaska is unique to them. And then we also have the MAL MT7s, which we actually have in the CONUS in Alaska that are used for glider towing primarily. But then we've also got the Gibson GA8s that were a tech platform for many years. That we originally flew them with hyperspectral imaging systems, but now they end up being more of a cargo mid-carrying aircraft, just because of the size of it, being able to carry large amounts of equipment and such. And then we've also got the Cessna 206s. Which the 206s generally have been flown in more of the mountainous terrain. So you see a lot of them in the Pacific and Rocky Mountain regions, though we do have a few in every region across the country with 41 of them now. And as we've moved into having sensors on airplanes, we tend to put them on the 206s for the larger sensors anyway, because it gives a greater capacity for support. But it's not all airplanes. We also have a huge communication system across the country. We use predominantly VHF FM radios to meet our mission requirements. What would generally be known as land mobile radio for the Air Force people out there. But we also have a pretty large HF radio capability, which allows us to communicate long range. So it gives us pretty good capabilities. We don't have a lot of access for things like satellite and that sort of thing, just because it's fairly expensive solutions. And to be honest, it would be difficult for us to deploy for the types of emergencies that we support and still be able to communicate with our customers. So this gives us kind of the best of both worlds. When you look at the deployments of those resources, our communication system is about a $35 million communication system across the country. And it's fairly up to date. We've actually we're funded through a lot of initiatives after the post 9/11, and over the years we've been able to do a lot of replacements, and now it's actually part of our baseline from Congress for our funding to replace essentially the fleet on our communications assets for field assets about every 5 to 10 years, depending on the resource. Some things like base stations and portable repeaters and such get replaced about every 10 years, where portable radios generally get replaced less, about 5 to 7 years. And that infrastructure is spread out far and wide. It's very robust. When I talk to my agency counterparts day to day, we have a lot of organizations that really want to plug into our infrastructure, and we do support a lot of our interagency partners with emergency communications, because we've got a pretty robust system, and it's a changing system as well. We're in the process of upgrading a lot of our systems, moving to Motorola radios. For those on the line that are used to using our E.F. Johnson radios, we're actually in the process of fielding and transitioning over to Motorola products, and we'll be doing that over the course of several years. But you'll see it essentially change to an entire Motorola fleet over about the next 5 years for all of our mobile and handheld assets. We've already started fielding ground team kits as well as mobile radios, and that's also a change for our systems. Historically, the mobile radios were installed in the field by our communications people. As you've well seen, a lot of new vehicles, it's really hard to install antennas and such in vehicles that actually have airbags and a lot of sensitive systems that spread out through the vehicles. So we're actually working as new vehicles are brought to the field. We're actually working with professional installers to actually have new radios installed. And that was actually approved in our plan now for all of our funding, so that every year as new vehicles are fielded, that we actually fund for installations of new radios in those vehicles as well. So as the fleet changes, new vehicles will get new radios. So it's a pretty decent deal. And we're also fielding more of the ground team kits as well. In the past, we've fielded handhelds individually. We found over the years that most wings were actually setting them up as deployable caches for their ground teams. So that's what we've moved to actually over time here, was setting up kits of 6 radios and a charger instead for a ground team. So that's how they're being deployed now. So they're trying to make sure that we're meeting the needs of our field personnel, and they're using them day to day. But it's also a changing system on other fronts. We're actually in the process of setting up the ReadyOps system to actually provide us remote base station options. So now you'll actually be able to have personnel that are set up on ReadyOps, like our incident commanders and our key staff, to be able to use essentially a connected device like an iPhone or another connected device like a computer and such, to actually be able to talk to folks around the country. It's essentially using some of our older radios, as we're retiring some, but we're also keeping some of the E.F. Johnsons and connecting them with an interoperability box from ReadyOps that allows us to actually communicate across the country. So kind of picture this. Picture a system where that you could actually have your incident commanders totally across the state. Give an example like Colorado. We could actually have somebody in northern Colorado actually talking to teams on the ground via their repeater over the internet. And it's basically through an interface box like this. And we're actually standing up sites across the country with the goal to actually have sites identified for ready op boxes by the end of this calendar year, and over the next several years to actually have them connected up. And you'll end up basically having a push-to-talk screen like this, where we'd be able to actually connect up across the country, and literally it could connect up all the repeaters across the country if we wanted to do a broadcast net, or you can pick and choose. So if you give that Colorado example again, you know, that incident commander that's managing resources that may be listening on 2 different repeaters, he could actually talk to crews over both repeaters using this interoperability system at the same time, and they'd reach out to them all. But you could also limit them so that you don't have to call out statewide. So in the past, a lot of the wings that had set up the capability to talk on their repeater system over the entire system, that was their only choice. They could either talk through the entire system, or they could just talk on one. Well, now you'll be able to pick and choose. And with ReadyOp, it also gives us another pretty incredible capability. It allows us actually to do alerting functions for our membership. So we've actually worked with them to actually plug in our emergency services qualified people, and as wings get involved in ReadyOp, they'll actually be able to do alerting messaging. And those people don't actually have to have individual licenses on the system. The people that are using the push-to-talk capabilities, that would, but the people that are just receiving messages and alerting through it, that can actually be done for any member that has a qualification. So we could actually set up groupings. For example, you know, a wing could actually set up alerts for all of their mission pilots if they need pilots for a mission, or if they needed to call out all the ground team leaders because of a certain request, they could do it that way. Or initially, they could call out and send out a broadcast to all the incident commanders to identify who's available to run a mission. So it gives us a lot of capability day to day, and also allows us to push messaging to people based on their qualifications across the board. So we could do that on a wing level, where right now, I think a lot of you have seen within WIMRs, I can push out a read message to folks that's a mandatory read file, but there's not really a way for wings to do that to their qualified people at a local level very easily. This will actually give them that capability to be able to reach out to people as they need to. But we also do a lot of other things. You know, we're kind of known for imagery these days. We do a lot of that with carry aboard handheld packages, mainly Nikon Pro quality cameras that we have assigned with every airplane. We also have access to the DART system, which is provided access by the National Guard. And then we also have about 100 airplanes that have access to having Garmin verbs out on the wings to allow us to collect imagery that way. Now, these are fairly inexpensive options, but they do give us some great capabilities. Like DART, for example, allows us to actually be interoperable across the whole DoD spectrum. So that you can not only really be pushing the imagery down to the ground, but you could literally be text chatting with a crew in real time. And those capabilities are really expanding. It's not just simple imagery systems anymore. We've actually got some more expensive systems that we're fielding now that really give us some pretty robust capabilities. The Waldo XCAM sensors is one. We started fielding these here a couple of years ago. We started with an initial test here. But now those systems, we've actually got 3 of them that we've purchased for the XCAM Ultras, and we also have an XCAM R, which is a linear net camera. But we've actually already done a purchase order for another 5 for this fiscal year, and we intend to purchase basically 5 every year going forward, so we can get more of them deployed across the country. So you'll see them initially fielded basically out to the regions. And then probably to the OCONUS wings that have some limited capability to get assets to them during disasters like Puerto Rico and Hawaii, so they have a native capability already. But it gives us pretty amazing capability. You know, this is some high resolution imagery that came out of the Waldo system. This is actually after Hurricane Michael that was done over the damage that happened in Mexico Beach. And it gives us not only the capability to give high-res imagery, but you can also see it in 3D. So that being able to see the real structural damage, we'll go back here for a second, that's the same building overhead. Well, you can tell a lot from that. Imagery analysts get a lot out of that data, but when you try to show this to a person up close, they get the idea when you start seeing the damage and things much more clearly in 3D. And it's expanding out from there as well. That imagery, that because of how it's set up, and with our partnerships with Skyline, who does the processing for us, and GeoX, who actually does the follow-on AI analysis for us, we've actually been able to use artificial intelligence now to actually do remote damage assessments. So now, in times like this, like COVID-19, where we've got issues with sending lots of people to the field to do assessments on buildings after a tornado goes through, or any other major disaster, you can actually do a lot of that with imagery that we collect overhead. And oh, by the way, we save them time doing it. It used to, in many cases, take days and weeks to get people out to see all the homes and to check them out. Well, now, this imagery, for example, for Arkansas, within 24 hours, we had provided them this AI assessment so that people 1,000 miles away could actually see this imagery and get an up-close look, and oh, by the way, have it clearly identified when homes have varied levels of damage, from anything from minor damage to buildings being destroyed. That also allows us to impact these communities quickly, because you got to remember, that's why we do this, is we're trying to help these people that have been impacted by a disaster. They're able to actually get assistance to them, whether it be helping pay for sheltering for them or just providing basic assistance. It allows them to put resources where they need them. And that capability is actually expanding, so that we can realistically marry that up with that 3D data and provide it in near real time. And we've actually got some states that are buying into systems. They flew the systems today in Texas. The state of Texas actually purchased 3 of these systems for Texas Wing to fly for them. And they started flying them today after the hurricane impacts and the flooding impacts that they were seeing from storms over the last several days. So it's pretty amazing capabilities. Now, that camera, you're looking at about $58,000 per camera. So it's not something that I can just field for every single airplane with the limited budgets that we have. But the leadership has put a lot of support into this. So now we actually are able to put out several of them and have it in the plans to do several of them every year, like I said. So it's a much different deal, and it's a game changer for emergency managers as well, giving us new opportunities for missions. But we've also got high-end sensors too. We've got several airplanes now that are actually set up with the MX-15 sensor balls that are supporting the green flag exercises, but they also are there to support defense support to civil authorities. Now, these are older airplanes in a few cases. We've got 2 of these 182Qs, and for those of you that don't know the models of the airplanes, the Q models are actually some of the oldest airplanes we have in the fleet. They were originally installed on there, though, because we have to follow the FAA requirements, and the supplemental type certificates that were available to install those sensors were on Q models. Well, we actually worked with the Air Force Research Lab and the Air Force overall to get funding to do them on new 206s. We've got one that we fielded in 2015, and fingers crossed, we'll accept the second one here probably sometime September or October. It's actually having a door put on it for the passenger side. 206s don't have a passenger side door on them that's actually needed for this. And it's also having a second radio installed. Once that's done, it'll actually be fielded. So we'll actually have a 206 at both of our operating locations. And our intention and our request to the Air Force is actually to try to have 5 of these airplanes to support these missions. We'd have 2 at each operating location, then another one that we would probably float between locations and for disasters. So it gives us a great capability, and it looks like we may actually have the third 206 funded with year-end funds from the Air Force. So we're going to see how that plays out, but the request is there, and the Pentagon is working it for us. So we're hopeful that we'll actually see that funding here over the next month to be able to get that initiated. It'll probably take close to a year to get that airplane, because it's a long process to actually get it redone, because they have to literally kind of rip out the innards on some of the airplane to do that and change out seats and install operator stations and the whole bit. But it's a pretty amazing capability. It truly fits into the whole operating architecture for DoD. So it literally plugs into the entire battle space. And we use this on warfighter training exercises. That was the main concept for this. And some of you will appreciate the irony for this. Everybody probably recognizes the name of General Goldfein as the Chief of Staff of the Air Force. Well, this program was actually signed into existence when General Goldfein only had 2 stars. He actually signed it in for us, and then transitioned jobs within a couple of months actually after that. But he still asks about this and has been a real big proponent for us to have resources like this, and it provides us some pretty amazing capabilities. You know, the sensors on this, they both electro-optical wide and narrow spotter vision, as well as an infrared sensor, give it the same capabilities that you would see on the MQ-1s and the MQ-9s in the DoD world. The only thing that we do not do right now is actually the laser spotting. And that was in part because originally there wasn't a pathway to do that in the way that we register airplanes. We cannot fly airplanes in a public use status as essentially a government airplane. But now the FAA has actually made some allowances. So when we accept the 4th airplane, it will probably have the laser designator actually set up on this. So that's a pretty neat deal, and we're hoping that we can actually go back and at least get the other 206 configured going forward. So it'll actually be able to pretty much mimic whatever you would see on a warfighter exercise day to day. We use it pretty much all the time. These 3 airplanes are our top 3 flying airplanes in the fleet, actually, and average over 400 hours a year on them. For the aviators, they probably recognize it, but for everybody else, a typical airplane in the CAP fleet flies about 180 to 200 hours a year. So we're using this generally 10 to 14 days a month on exercises. It slowed down a little bit this year due to the COVID-19 stuff, but it's still flying a bunch, and they both can get a lot of activity. And it's not just airplanes. We've also expanded into the small UAS realm that I mentioned to you earlier. We're probably the largest owner of small UAS in the United States, if not the world. And we are using it for some pretty incredible capabilities for collecting imagery. And it actually came out of our disaster work. Some of you probably remember the Moore, Oklahoma tornadoes. That was actually the catalyst for this. We work very closely with the geospatial staff and the response office at FEMA, and their staff actually worked with us to actually have the DHS Science and Technology Office develop our small UAS capability. They actually built the initial package that allows us to collect imagery like this, where you're actually stitching together hundreds of pictures from the imagery that's collected over a fairly small area. Now, we're not going to use this to collect like for a hurricane, because that would be huge impact areas. But when you have those tornadoes or small target areas, it gives you a pretty incredible capability to do this with teams in the field. So that picture like critical infrastructure, or when you have a site that you want real high resolution imagery, this capability actually will allow us to do that. And our intention in the long run is actually to have this fielded across the country. We're fielding this for a lot of capabilities. We're doing counter UAS programs. We field everything pretty much under Part 107, and we're supporting several bases across the country with counter UAS as well. But it's also a pretty amazing deal that is really developing. You have some wings that are just getting started, but we've also got some wings that have reached our interim operating capability, which the intention there was to actually have 5 teams established that could actually operate the UAS that we fielded. And then the full operating capability was to have 10 teams established. And we've got several wings that have already met that as well. We'll be working to that over the next several years, but that's not really going to be a game changer for us. We're actually going to be fielding here that by the end of this year that we'll actually be fielding a small UAS capability for every CAP incident command post, which is about 150 of them across the country. So it's giving us another good mission that a lot of our ground folks will actually get very well plugged in, as well as our aviators. It's a good crossover mission for us. And so we can have ground teams deploying with them, but you can also have people that just have an aviation background that could operate these as well, as long as they're properly licensed. So it's a pretty neat deal. And that we've already been employing them. FEMA actually did not want to stand up their own small UAS capability when they knew that there are other organizations like us out there. And they've actually got us essentially as their primary capability to augment their urban search and rescue teams. And we've actually deployed with them. We deployed for the earthquakes down in Puerto Rico. And they can also deploy some unique capabilities. We're primarily doing general imagery, so it's pretty basic stuff. But we also have the capability to lease other sensors. And in Puerto Rico, there was a request for us to fly LiDAR. So we actually flew that over several of the impacted areas. And it gives us some pretty amazing detail that the technology really helps us show the comparisons. This was one good example for it, where they actually used it after Hurricane Maria and the Puerto Rico earthquake. They used the imagery that we had collected previously for the hurricane, and then did comparisons of it to the damage that happened in 2020. So we're actually supporting over a spectrum of time, and they were able to see from that imagery the damage and call it out very quickly and highlight it with that LiDAR sensor. So there again, those sensors saving time for people, but it also helps highlight when damage occurred. Unfortunately, the Puerto Rico, the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico is pretty well bound to get hurricanes almost every year. Well, in some cases, it takes a long time to get that damage repaired, and they want to know, when did this occur? Well, they now have baseline imagery for LiDAR for some of these areas that they can then compare it to and say, okay, yes, there was damage there before, but not the same damage. Or they can see that there was no damage before and now there is. So it's a pretty amazing deal. We also used them together. And so for a lot of these missions that we did down in Puerto Rico, we were actually flew the Waldo air sensor, but we also flew the small UAS to get up close that potential there. So we highlighted a capability with the Waldo air sensor, but then flew the small UAS up close to provide engineers the detailed information that they needed that we can't necessarily gather very easily flying a couple thousand feet up, where you can do a lot of that with small UAS. So it opens a lot of doors for new missions for us. And we've also expanded into other ground-based imagery. We've had a lot of our ground teams that have been going out taking high water marks, and you've probably seen some of that. But we're actually also going to be doing car mounts for imagery. So that same Waldo type sensor, some of you have probably seen the imagery that you get out of like the Google cars that you see on a lot of the Google apps. Well, this is a very similar sensor that we would actually deploy after disaster. So you drive it into a neighborhood and collect the ground level imagery that marries up then with what we collect on the airborne imagery and the small UAS imagery. So we provide an entire spectrum of capability, and we'd be able to deploy these in a couple of Pelican cases and essentially have a camera system that is orthorectified and provides that geospatial picture that we need for tracking the camera, but also can marry that all together. So it then provides us really an incredible opportunity to really reach out. And we're actually, it looks like we're going to be accepting 4 of these by the end of the fiscal year. And so that's the goal right now. We were originally expecting to get 2 of them, and our folks that we work with at Waldo Air that are helping build the packages for us figured out some ways to do this less expensively and provide greater capability, ironically, because the technology is improving so much every day. And they're actually going to be fielding that for us here over the next several months. So we'll be deploying that for major disasters in the future. There again, it's not something that they will be able to field for every ground team, but we'll probably have deployable packages within the regions to actually get out there for events and try to provide training to teams around the country to make sure that we can hit the hot spots when we need to. And we've also got a new program that's coming on board. Now, a lot of you probably haven't even heard about this. Is the Aeronet program, the Airborne Extensible Relay Over Horizon Network. It's actually a DoD program that's actually done by the Air Force, which is going to allow us to provide a capability to stream the imagery down to the ground from our small UAS as well as from the aircraft, and also relay that to our ground teams using essentially Android devices. So that we've actually set this up that the initial test was that they came to us. It's actually to support an Air Force program, but that program was actually set up to be able to help for humanitarian assistance and disaster relief around the world. That program is so that partner nations that need to be able to talk to DoD forces and are deploying forces around the globe for humanitarian assistance missions, they never really were able to talk to them. They can't share the data very easily. Now they'll be able to do that, and we're basically the demonstration capability for the DoD to do that. And they'll be able to use that even for their warfighter needs, because obviously there's limitations to what we can share in the classified realm for imagery from our warfighter aircraft and systems. But this actually allows us to bridge that gap. And it also gives us a pretty incredible capability. So what's actually happening with this, it's actually a multi-million-dollar program. The initial capability has gotten fielded in Arizona to be that demonstration for the partner nations. But the follow-on piece to that is actually a multi-million-dollar program that's actually been fielded to support in the southeast, southwest, and the mid-Atlantic region, where we're actually going to be deploying capabilities with the dismounted user kits, as well as airborne kits and handheld kits. And we also have a licensed server to be able to do this. So anybody with an Android device, we'd be able to potentially connect up onto these systems. So it gives us a much broader capability, and it's not just shifting imagery down to the ground. It's got a live texting capability. It's got a tracking capability, so we would know where the assets are that we're talking to in real time. And through recent demonstrations on this, we've seen that all the varied agencies that use it, it's not just a DoD asset. It's the TAC program that's used. It's actually on the DoD side, it's a tactical assault kit is what they call it. But it actually allows for individual resources using a multi-spectrum radio to transmit in real time and high-res video. So you'd be able to send, in many cases, HD quality video down to the ground from some of those high-res sensors that we had on some of the airplanes, like the FLIR sensors and the Westcams. But we'd also be able to use even just traditional imagery and send it very quickly. So it's a pretty amazing deal. It was designed for warfighters, but the Chief of Staff of the Air Force actually thought of us for demonstrating the capability and actually pushed the Aeronet team to reach out to us to try to demonstrate it and to give us a capability that will allow us to really push things in a much greater capability going forward for our teams across the country. So over the next several years, you'll see a lot of this getting fielded, and we will probably be looking at adjusting our table of allowances to actually allow for more of this in other areas of the country. And we'll actually be maintaining a deployable package as well, so that even though this was the initial fielding is to support the major hurricanes that we always pretty much have every year, it also has been set up so that we could deploy it to other areas of the country for disasters and events as we need to. But probably our biggest asset is our people. We've got almost over 67,000 members. About 36,000 of them really get involved in our operational missions, though, and hold qualifications. And for everybody on the line, we obviously think about aviation resources when we think about pilots and crew members, but it's a lot of other places. We've got over 4,000 ground team members, over 600 incident commanders, and we work really hard to make sure that we've got the right people qualified. And that's a big challenge. Our people meet the National Incident Management System requirements, and we're working to actually update a lot of the training materials to go along with that. And one of the things that's actually happening right now, I'm in the process of hiring a full-time training manager. That's one of the missions in life is actually going to be revising a lot of the task guides that were developed years ago. To actually work with teams to field that. So over the next several years, you'll actually be seeing an entire revamp of our curriculum. But I will tell you that we've actually kind of been on the leading edge for a lot of this. Some of you online have been able to take advantage of it since we started the COVID-19 missions. But the remote training that we've been able to do and the virtual training like you're doing right now, we're not only providing that to our CAP members, that we've actually got some teams of our folks using NESA's mobile training teams providing ICS 300 and 400 training that to people around the country in and out of CAP in some cases. But we've also been supporting that with some of those really experienced team members and providing training to FEMA employees and to emergency management professionals for some of the training out of the Emergency Management Institute, because they saw how well that we were doing it, and they've allowed us to basically help fill that gap. So we're kind of setting the example in emergency management across the country for some of this. And a lot of that's because of the types of people that we have. Most volunteer organizations don't have people that take the time and go and do all of the training and meeting the qualifications that our people do. When we're very blessed, we've got some pretty incredible folks that really do that and run our missions from soup to nuts. That's pretty incredible. And we've taken on some pretty amazing things. Search and rescue is our backbone mission. It still is, and it probably will be for a long time. That we get credit with saving a lot of lives every year. That a lot of that may be a technology like our cell phone forensics and our radar forensics. And as of today, we've got 95 lives that have been saved just in this fiscal year alone. An average year is actually between 82 and 83 actually that in our history. The last several years though, it's been over 100 in every fiscal year. So it's pretty amazing what we're doing. But it's not just SAR. We've got disaster relief operations. We support fires and floods and tornadoes. COVID-19 stuff, we've done a lot of different things. It's pretty amazing things. And we support it not only on our own side of things, but we also support the DoD world for this. We try to be a good partner to our Air Force counterparts in the rest of the DoD world. But it's also not just SAR-DR. Some of you that probably got involved because of emergency services, but we do have a lot of broader operational missions that we do. Counter-drug missions along the border, though they weren't supported this year, we actually are going to be starting that back up in FY21. We also do air defense intercepts, low-level route surveys, the surrogate missions that we showed you the green flag airplanes for, RPA escort missions, and a lot of range support. So it's a huge deal. It ends up being about 27% of all of our Air Force assigned missions, which is about 82% of our flying overall. Those Air Force assigned missions include our training and cadet orientation flights and stuff too. But we do a lot of work for the Air Force every year, and it's our flying is going to be down this year because of COVID-19. We had to stop a lot of things, but we still did a lot of incredible work, and our folks didn't miss a beat. Even during all the limitations with COVID-19, we still met all of our emergency requirements that came up, which was we didn't have to turn down any missions that came forward, which I think is a credit to all of our volunteers. Day to day, those missions from the Homeland Security and Defense along the border and escorting ships out to sea, to the low-level route surveys and the range support missions, we fly thousands of hours of other types of missions day to day. Those air defense intercept missions that I mentioned, that we used to not do a lot of those. The pre-9/11, we might do a handful of those in a year. If you had asked me that we'd be doing this many now, back before then, I probably would have laughed at you. Now, pretty much every business day, we have them going somewhere. And we actually flew over 1,600 sorties last year for them. Now, this year, there were less of them just because there was a lot less of them at the intercept training going on. But we do this literally all the time and helping them prepare our fighter units to actually be able to defend our borders, which is a critical mission that we're doing for DoD. And we provide a lot of other support. Sometimes it's the accident and incident response for the military, just doing base perimeter patrols and supporting the bases with their imagery, escorting RPAs. That's something that we still do down in Texas and up in Syracuse, New York, where we actually did that for several years. But now we only support it when their radar system is either down for repairs or when they want to do testing for that stuff, just to make sure that people can still practice the old skills. But it's amazing capabilities. I gotta also highlight what we've been doing for COVID-19. It's been pretty amazing. We've done missions that we really weren't planning to do. We have done blood drives and units for that. We've distributed millions of meals around the country. We've put together and distributed 1.6 million masks. We've been moving test samples in remote areas to test centers. And we've also they did disaster imagery for folks. As they were setting up those mobile training or testing sites, we actually have been providing that imagery. And you can see here that what's happened over the last 7 days and what was done. This is yesterday's report. Today's data will get collected tonight. The situational reports actually get sent in around 10 p.m. and then collected and put together for a report overnight. But it's a lot of stuff happening. Most wings have been involved. We have a few that weren't, but we have wings doing all sorts of activity, and it's really been varied. Distributing food was actually the biggest one, but we did lots of different types of support, whether it be transporting people or kits, reconnaissance missions. A lot of things that we probably would have never done. It's opened a lot of mission doors for us to give other activity to our wings. So this has been not only a difficult time, but a good time for CAP, because I think that a lot of emergency managers and agencies across the country have come to know CAP now and what we can do, which is just great. And so I'm at the end of the presentation side of things here. Let me kind of pull up the chat here and see what we got for conversations here. Just to see if there's some Q&A questions that I can try to address here for you. I know the guys and gals that are working behind the scenes here will try to answer some, because I can see them furiously typing on the computer behind here and answering things. So thank you everybody for doing that behind the scenes. So let's see here. Carol Martin, is there a projection as to when the Aeronet system will be available for use in each region? The initial fielding for the next expansion for Aeronet, which is going to hit primarily in the southeast, is to do that over the next year. So this is a long-term initiative for Aeronet. We will have some capability brought to Mid-Atlantic region, probably in North and South Carolina, because this was primarily set up as a hurricane support initiative. But we'll be working to field that here over the next year with the funding that's been provided, and then we'll look to expand from there. We're already working with the Air Force to try to look at what the follow-on piece is for that. But that's the game plan, is to look at this as a long-term initiative. Because of the cost involved, it's not something that we can just jump into overnight. You're looking at packages generally for those dismounted user kits. You're looking at $7,000 to $10,000 a piece for some of those things. So it's obviously not an inexpensive proposition. But that's the game plan, is to try to field as much as we can over time here, and to work with the Air Force to integrate it into our baseline and our table of allowances. Let's see here, Lieutenant Fantazzi from Puerto Rico. I know last year they were here in Puerto Rico, but I would like to know if there would, let's see here, did somebody close that one? Yeah, they'd like to know, would there be another Waldo course in Puerto Rico, and when would it be? When we deploy the assets down there, we will probably do some real-time training. But as we get the systems on board, we will be actually doing some train-the-trainer courses. Right now, some of that's been on hold basically because of the limited travel and restrictions on that due to all the coronavirus stuff. But as we field those systems, we'll actually be identifying train-the-trainers out there to do that. So that will actually be coming to you. For Aeronet, the question was, is it free for Androids on cell phones? Yes, it's actually a licensed product, though, so it's not just something you readily download. So we'll actually be fielding a tax server for that on our own, and then we'll be licensing that out to people. So as the program gets out there and we start fielding assets, we'll do it. We won't just be putting it out for every member to just download the Aeronet apps and stuff. It'll actually be a targeted distribution on those things. But as teams start getting trained and experienced in it, we'll actually be opening that up more and more. We had a cadet airman that asked about where intercept trainings actually take place. Intercept training generally supports all of the fighter units that are actually responsible through the 1st Air Force for air defense around the country. So all of those active guard and reserve units that actually support the air defense mission, we actually support those training exercises. That's actually with qualified CAT crews. So for Cadet Piper, you won't be able to do that right away. but when you turn 18 and are able to actually participate in an aircrew, you could actually qualify and support an aircrew for doing that. But right now, generally, we use our most experienced crews as well, because it's kind of precision flying. They're expected to fly a very detailed route and meet very close time gates because it's very controlled. Obviously, we're doing training for the intercept training, where in some cases it's not only training but qualification based. So those fighter units that are sitting alert, they also get evaluated, and they're evaluated in some cases by intercepting our airplanes. So that they go through and actually the intercepting unit does not necessarily know it's a training event until they see our red, white, and blue airplane. So we've practiced a lot and make sure that we've got people prepared for that, but we do that all across the country. Let's see here. I had a question here on when do you think we'll get back to CAP activities? Well, here's the deal with the activities right now. We're actually working on remobilizing across the country. The vast majority of the wings are in phase 1 or phase 2, which phase 1 is basically small group training, 10 people or less. And that's happening in most wings right now, though we do have a few that are still in phase 0 that are in areas that have had recent outbreaks. But a lot of wings are actually moving into phase 2 now, where they're actually starting with small group training and activities again that are just day activities. We don't go to overnight activities again until phase 3. Phase 3 for a lot of wings will probably start in September. We limited that starting until September because of all the numbers that we were seeing over the summer here. As you've probably seen on the news, there were a lot of regression in some of the wings that, as lots of people gathered at big events around July 4th and other places, we saw an increase in numbers of people that were infected with coronavirus. So we've been very careful and limited in what our folks are doing. But in the big picture, we're shooting to try to have wings open as quickly as they can, but also safely. So some wings, it may be a month or 2 from now. Some wings, it could be longer. Some wings, it could be just a few weeks from now. So that's pretty amazing deals where our folks are working to try to get all of our people trained and try to get them ready to get back to business. But we're working to do that safely and protect our members at the same time. And then the last question we got here is, I think it's from Cole Brown. I think I recognize the link there. What is your expectation for members to focus on in emergency services for the next year? Well, one is getting back to normal business, like we were just talking about. I'm like all of you. I would love to see us actually getting back to regular missions again, and trying to make sure that we're able to do all the things that we like doing. Got to do it safely though and get back to that. But there's a lot of training that was not able to happen over the summer. With like for example, with NESA, we did not run our main schools this summer. We did a lot of mobile training team stuff over the summer, and where we did a lot of distance learning. And obviously, this is session 6 for this, so you've seen a lot of the opportunities that we've done at a distance using staff that wanted to try to help. But we want to see wings get back into that and they requalify people and try to get back to normal business, but also, like I mentioned earlier, take advantage of some of those missions that we took on during the coronavirus that we helped our states with and build off of that. We have shown that organizationally we can be a real powerhouse. We've got some incredible people all across the country that want to help their communities, that are willing to do some pretty great things. And we want the states to know that, and we want you to be able to train and do those things. So hopefully, we can get back to doing that, and also build in these new systems and a lot of the technology that we talked about here this evening, and start employing a lot of that, and getting a lot of you trained up and using it. We want to get teams both cadet and adult members trained up for small UAS. We want to get more air crews qualified. By the way, the Air Force is investing heavily in us. We're seeing dollars not only in the emergency services side of things, but also in the operational training. So that I want to see us get back into the business of doing cadet flight training and cadet orientation flights, and doing all those things that we like to do operationally, that we're good at, and that we've got a good case for doing. And oh, by the way, the Air Force is investing in us to allow us to do some more of that, and hopefully develop cadets not only beyond getting their private pilot certificate, but also getting instrument ratings, and hopefully even developing tracks so that we can develop our own CFIs in-house. And it fills some of the gaps that we have across the country, while also developing a lot of new skills and a lot of new qualifications. So hopefully that answers all the questions there, and it answers the mail. But I hope everybody enjoyed the presentation this evening, and that we're able to really go forward. So just the one thing I would ask for everybody, that as we look to next year, please take the time, be safe while you're pushing forward for missions. But please do the training and get out there and get involved where you can, because you are the spirit and blood of our organization. I know I'm very proud of what all of you have done. Those of you that don't know me, I've been a member since 1987. I joined as a cadet myself. I started the ES Academy at the national level, and I've been at the headquarters over 25 years now. And I am impressed every day with all the things that our people do, and the innovation and the tools that we bring to bear. And a lot of that comes from you. So if you've got ideas, you've got suggestions, work with your leadership, bring them up to the table. That we don't want you to just go run amok. That we do want you to try to do things smartly and work with your leaders to do things right. But do please speak up to your leaders and let them know when you got good ideas, because there's a lot of things that we wouldn't be doing today if it wasn't for our members bringing these good ideas forward. Just about all of them in this briefing, actually. So thanks for taking the time tonight, and I hope you enjoyed the presentation.
And thank you, sir. This is Major Perman.